Every year I know reading Shakespeare is difficult, and in your case, it's even more so because you're doing it over the summer and you have to read the whole play without the guidance of a teacher. So I do what's called a prologue before each Shakespearean play that we read, um, just one per year, so don't panic. But that said, I'm stealing this idea from Ashland Shakespeare Festival. They do something like this for their education groups when they come through. My way is going to be extremely cheesy. I probably could find something more exciting on the iPad or use iMovie in a more exciting way. However, I am running up against time constraints to get this done before school ends so that I can post it on the web page before you all go off to the four corners of the earth. So we're going to be cheesy, and I'm hoping this helps you as you start to read Hamlet over the course of the summer. I'm going to talk about family and characters before the play begins. As you can see here, I've drawn lovely pictures I used to win awards for art. Just kidding. So we have the principal characters involved here before the play begins, which I know sounds weird, but I'll get there in a minute. King Hamlet, who is King of Norway, his lovely wife Gertrude, and then Hamlet, the title character, the protagonist of our play, and the current Prince of Denmark. Over here I have Claudius, who is Hamlet's uncle, and you'll notice down here King Hamlet and Claudius are brothers. So this is the state of affairs, I'd say 6 months, maybe a year before the play even opens. So if we move on from there, I'm going to introduce you to the side plot. Shakespeare likes side plots, and the trouble with them is that you're generally not overly excited about them because they're a little bit harder to follow. They're not the central thing to pay attention to. But in this case, you're going to want to keep track as much as you can of the Fortinbras family over the course of the play. And I've heard Fortinbras, I've also heard Fortinbras, so I don't really care how you say it because I've heard it both ways. Basically, we have a king of Norway before the play opens. His name is King Fortinbras. He has a son. If you want to add Junior after this, that's fine. The only Fortinbras you're going to meet in the play is this one. But prior to the play's opening, we have a king of Norway and his son, Fortinbras, and we have Old Norway, who also does not have a name, but who is brother to the king. And so clearly Old Norway would be Prince Fortinbras' uncle. And if the color had come out, you would be able to tell that this is the Norwegian flag, and I was trying to be very helpful because this is the Danish flag. This is all red with a white stripe. This is red with a blue stripe in the middle of the white. Not that it really matters, you won't be tested on that later, but we have two countries here that we're concerned about. Okay, again, before the play, the King of Denmark and the King of Norway go to war. So King Hamlet and King Fortinbras go to war, and Denmark is the victor. You'll notice that his eyes are axed out. He is killed in battle. And when this happens, Denmark gains a bunch of land from Norway. They don't gain Norway itself. They just gain extra land that Norway had, wherever that might be. But Denmark, or King Hamlet, wins these lands because he kills the king in battle. Not long after that, King Hamlet also dies. So now we're back in Denmark. You'll notice here's Queen Gertrude. The king is dead. Hamlet and Gertrude are very sad. So too is Claudius. The story that is told, the way that he died, is that he was sleeping in the garden and a snake bit him and the poison killed him. So that's the story that is circulated throughout Denmark. He died of this weird accident in the garden. And don't ask me what kinds of snakes they have in Denmark, because that's a very cold country, so who knows. Okay, so that's all prior to the play. Also prior to the play, and this is now, this part happens a little bit before this part. Old Norway gets the crown, so the uncle becomes the king, and Fortinbras is still the prince. Over here, King Claudius, Hamlet's uncle, actually marries Queen Gertrude, and because he marries the queen, he becomes king, so King Claudius. And of course, you can imagine Prince Hamlet is in a funk over quite a lot of things. First, his father is dead. Second, his uncle has now married his mother. One of the things that you need to look for is how upset he is over losing the crown. See if that comes up in the conversations as you read through the play. so there are parallels, and this is why the side plot is important. There are two uncles who are now king instead of the princes. And both of them presumably are of age to have become king. So one of the other questions to ask yourself is, why does Queen Gertrude marry Claudius? What are her motives? And why might she want to marry so early? Okay, after the king's death. Now, we're finally starting the actual play. So this is all backstory prior to, and the reason I tell you that is because as you read through Act 1, they're going to reference these events that took place in the past. So Act 1, Scene 1, we have guards. There are 3 of them, Marcellus, Bernardo, and I think Fernando, if I remember correctly. And I only put 2 on there because one of them trades out. But basically these guards have seen a strange sight. They've seen a ghost. And it is a ghost that looks like the dead king. I know that doesn't look like the dead king. I was trying to draw armor because he's the king. Sorry, the king's ghost looks like it's wearing armor. This is extremely distressing. They see it often enough that they call Horatio, and Horatio is Hamlet's best friend. And they say, hey, we've seen this ghost. Horatio says, yeah, I don't believe you. Stick around with us. You're going to find out we're not lying to you. And sure enough, the ghost appears to Horatio as well. And of course, if you're Hamlet's best friend and you see a ghost that looks like his dead father, your first instinct is, I must go tell Hamlet. So pay attention as you read this opening scene. I believe it's in the opening scene. The guards are talking about, why are we keeping watch when we're supposedly at peace? Pay attention to that. And the king's appearing in armor has significance for them that they're going to misread. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Other characters I've not yet introduced you to, but I now shall. I'm going to have to cut Hamlet's head off there for a second. This is Polonius. Tried to give him a bald pate. He's a little bit of a ridiculous character. You can think of him as chief advisor to the king, but he's also a bit of a windbag. His son is Laertes, son of Polonius, as you can see. And this is Ophelia, the daughter of Polonius. So Laertes and Ophelia are siblings, and Ophelia happens to be the love interest of Hamlet. So you can see that she's thinking about him with hearts, and if you want to say those look like butterflies, that would be fine too. You're going to meet them now in Act 1, Scene 2. The king and queen are holding court. And so there's a number of things that are talked about and reported on in this opening court scene. So Act 1, Scene 2. One of the first things that takes place is that they have news of Fortinbras. He's on the move. He's seeking revenge. Basically, the king and queen tell, I think this is Voltmond or Cornelius, I can't remember which at the moment, but they tell him, look, you go back to the old king of Norway, old Norway, and tell him what his nephew is doing, and see if he'll put the kibosh on him. They do a lot of talking about their recent marriage, and one thing to look for is how long they've been married since the death of the king. When did they get married after the death of the king? How much time had passed between the king's passing and their getting married. They talk about this. They also give permission for Laertes here. He's come home for the funeral of the king, and he stayed for the wedding of the new king and queen. And now he wants to go back to France. He's a student there. May I please go back to France? So we first have the report on Fortinbras. We have this nice little speech I left out as number 2, but let's pretend. Then we have this bit from Laertes, can I please go back to France? And they say, absolutely not a problem. Hamlet over here is glowering in the corner. He's wearing black, which you can't really tell other than he looks very glowery. And Claudius and Gertrude appeal to him. Hamlet, why are you still upset? Every father dies, everybody dies. You know, your dad was a great man, but it's time to move on. We'd like you to think of Claudius as your second dad. And Hamlet is not buying it. He's just not into it. So they get through with their speech, and he basically says, may I also return? May I also go back to school? May I go to Wittenberg? He goes to school in Wittenberg. The answer this time is no. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to think about is why Claudius might say yes to Laertes and no to Hamlet. Why is he going to keep Hamlet close by when he wants to go back to school? And then the last thing, and I didn't want to make another piece of paper, so I'm sorry. But basically, everybody leaves. He has a big speech about, that this too sullied flesh would melt and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting cannot fix this can against self-slaughter. He's very depressed. Pardon me. And his best friend Horatio comes in and says, hey, I've seen this ghost. It looks like your dead father. Let's go check it out. And that's how scene 2 of Act 1 ends. When you go to Act 1, Scene 3, now we're just with the Polonius family. So essentially, Laertes is about to leave, and they're saying goodbye to him. Polonius first gives him a lot of advice, and if you pay attention to that speech, you're going to see a lot of cliches that are now very common in the vernacular, or to put it in easier terms, they're very common expressions that you recognize now in the English language, right? He gives his son a lot of advice. Laertes in turn gives Ophelia some advice. Hey, listen, you got to watch out for Hamlet. I know you really like him, but he's got to marry for the sake of the kingdom. He can't marry necessarily just out of love. Don't trust that he's going to stick with you. You be careful not to give your chaste treasure, is what he calls it, away to him. So be careful about Prince Hamlet. She says, okay, brother, make sure that you practice what you preach, but they have a very loving sort of relationship. Laertes departs, and then Polonius gets in on the action, and his speech is very, very different from Laertes. Instead of a loving brother in a loving tone, he's basically saying, you're a dumb girl, don't make a fool of me over Hamlet, you don't know enough about life and love, and she protests, Hamlet hath importuned me in honorable fashion. So he's saying, make sure you don't sleep with him, and she says, oh, we haven't, Daddy. Of course, every teenager says this when they're confronted about that sort of thing, right? But that said, one of the things you can look for as you read the play is whether or not their relationship has been on the up and up. Pardon me. So sorry. All right. And the last bit I'm going to leave you with is Act 1, Scene 4. The ghost does appear. Horatio and the guards do not want Hamlet to go one-on-one with the ghost, but Hamlet shoves them off. So actually what I'm telling you is Act 1, Scenes 4 and 5, in all truth. But what you want to be looking for is the king has some news. The dead ghost. How about the dead king, in the form of a ghost, has news. And Hamlet says, I knew it. And the king gives him a command, and Hamlet is now tasked with something to do on the king's behalf. And from there on out, we get the start of the play. So in all truth and honesty, what really kicks the events of the play off, it's called the inciting moment, is this visitation from the ghost. So that's my introduction to you in terms of how to wade through all these characters and that language. I do have some other links for you, which I'm going to have Mrs. Schneider put onto the website. These are these are mini lectures that you can watch that will help you understand Shakespeare's language a little bit better, and it will also help you in terms of understanding what the ghost or the supernatural was like in Elizabethan conception. Because there's a lot going on in Act 1 that might seem pretty straightforward, but in Elizabethan concepts of ghosts actually is not. And so some of that discussion is what propels the rest of the play and some of our discussion in class. So I hope that's been helpful. If you are reading and you have questions for me, I will probably urge you as much as possible to try to figure things out on your own, but I am willing to answer some questions if you have them, especially as we get closer to the start of school. Okay? All right, thank you. I hope that was helpful.